Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon. Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon. Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon.
On World Economy today, India EU are set to resume trade talks in Brussels and will begin from there. Senior officials from India and the 27-nation EU will begin the next round of talks. To iron out differences for an early conclusion of the negotiations, an official said, as reported, a multiple instruction and multiple indication in this one indicates that this will be the 14th round of negotiations between the two sides. The 5-day talks are set to begin on October 6, the official added. A Commerce and Industry Minister, Piyush Goyal, has recently expressed hope that an agreement will be signed soon. India and the EU resumed negotiations in June 2022, according to reports. A seal on the conversation, along with the Investment Protection Agreement and a pact on geographical indication after a hiatus of over 8 years, the EU is seeking significant tariff reduction on automobiles, medical devices and other products such as wine, meats and poultry. The EU accounts for about 17% of India's total exports, while the bloc's exports to India represent around 9% of its total global shipment. And now to OPEC, as OPEC Plus sticks to modest output increase for November. OPEC and its allies on Sunday agreed to a modest oil output increase, maintaining their cautious approach to avoid a price slump while securing more revenue. 8 OPEC Plus members, led by Saudi Arabia, will raise production by 137,000 barrels per day in November, matching October's increase, the group announced after an online meeting. The move continues the cartel's gradual unwinding of earlier production caps totaling about 1.65 million barrels per day introduced in 2023. A previous layer of cuts, amounting to 2.2 million barrels per day, was already fully reserved in September, a year ahead of schedule. And now to Nigeria, looking at MSMEs in Nigeria. In 2025, the business community in Nigeria is primarily worried about inflation, with 48.9% citing it as their top concern. This overwhelming response highlights how rising costs of goods, services, and inputs are eroding profitability and weakening consumer purchasing power. The foreign exchange rate at 17.1% is the next major worry, reflecting the volatility of the naira and its direct impact on import, pricing, and investment planning. Let's look at the charts indicating all of this. SMMEs in Nigeria. Businesses also highlight insecurity 15.6% as a persistent barrier, especially in regions struggling with instability, while government policies 10% raise concerns about unpredictability in the regular and fiscal environment. Finally, although inadequate infrastructure at 8.4% ranks lowest, it remains a structural challenge, as you can see, with poor roads, unstable electricity supply, and weak logistics network still affecting business efficiency. Taken together, these insights paint a picture of an economy where macro-level pressures, that is inflation and forex, are top of mind, while structural and policy issues remain critical by secondary concerns. And now to Tunisia. Tunisia inflation rate is lowest since 2021. Tunisia's annual inflation rate slowed to 5% in September 2025, the lowest since May 2021, and down from 5.2% in August. The slowdown was mainly driven by softer price increases in food and non-alcoholic beverages, marking the slowest pace since April 2021. Prices also moderated for recreation and culture, restaurants, cafe and hotel services, transport services and furnishing and household equipment. Meanwhile, inflation was steady for housing and clothing, housing at 3.4%, clothing and footwear at 8.9%. On a monthly basis, consumer prices rose by 0.6% in September, accelerating from a 0.3% increase in August and marking the fastest pace in 5 months. And now let's look at the charts indicating Tunisia's inflation rate. The charts this morning. Inflation in Tunisia faces ups and downs, but in recent times it's shown a slowdown from September last year, where Tunisia's inflation was about 6.7%, began to slow down at that peak and dropping. Early 2025 hit 6% and went even further, a little downward and upward movement, especially for March, where it went a little upward but began to drop and currently at 5%, indicating that the cost of commodities in Tunisia is dropping and also the Tunisian currency becoming stronger. Still on the foreign scene, Switzerland jobless rates are unchanged at 2.8%. Switzerland's non-seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was steady at 2.8% in September 2025, remaining at its highest level since April. The number of unemployed persons increased by 1,001 and from a month earlier to 132,200. The youth unemployment rate, measuring job seekers between 15 and 24 years old, remained at 3.2%, its highest level since March 2021, with the number of young unemployed rising by only 2,000 to 13,900. Meanwhile, the number of reported job vacancies dropped by 5,000 to 37,400. On a seasonally adjusted basis, the unemployment rate ticked up to 3% in September from 2.9% in the previous month. And now looking at French assets as they tumble after Prime Minister resignation. The CAC 40 fell more than 2%, while French bond yields surged, with a 10-year yield nearing its highest level since 2011, as renewed political turmoil weighed on investor sentiment. Prime Minister Lokono resigned just weeks after taking office, and only a day after President Emmanuel Macron unveiled a new government that drew widespread criticism. And now let's look at global company stocks around the world. Global company stocks around the world. According to details we're looking at from company stocks around the world, Apple at a price level of $258 per share are gaining just slightly this morning at 0.07%. Tesla gaining 2.33% this morning at $439 per share. Microsoft also gaining 0.31%. Amazon falling by a negative 1.3%. Meta also falling by a negative 2.27%. Nvidia are gaining 0.95% this morning for the stocks. And for the stocks, we have the likes of JP Morgan gaining 0.81% this morning, J&J upward by 1.43%, ExxonMobil gaining 1.77%, Alphabet falling a negative 0.14%. And now to the financial markets, Bitcoin hit new all-time high. A Bitcoin rallied to nearly $126,000 in early October, setting a new all-time high as global economic uncertainty and the ongoing U.S. government shutdown fueled self-having demand for the leading crypto assets. The shutdown has suspended key federal operations and delayed major data releases, including September's job report, originally due Friday. Expectations for further U.S. Federal Reserve rate cuts also boosted sentiment, with markets nearly fully pricing in a quarter-point cut this month and another in December. Additional momentum came from strong inflows into U.S.-listed spot Bitcoin ETFs, which recorded a total net inflow of $3.25 billion last week. And now to the cryptocurrency markets. The price of cryptos. Cryptocurrency market indicates the price of Bitcoin at 124,143 at the moment, an all-time high. It hit earlier at 126,000. A Bitcoin price at gaining 602 points this morning, a 0.49%. Ether upward by 1.14 points, or 14%. Binance also gaining 4.35%. Cardano, Solana, Ripple, and Polkadot all gaining. And now to the euros, as a euro falls to near two-week low as French Prime Minister stepped down. The euro fell more than 0.5% today, slipping below $1.167, its weakest level since September 25th, after French newly appointed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu resigned. The move followed President Emmanuel Macron's decision to retain a largely unchanged cabinet, which drew swift criticism from opposition parties. Lecornu, who took office less than a month ago, faced the daunting challenge of steering a budget through a deeply divided parliament. The upcoming fiscal plan is expected to include unpopular spending cuts and tax hikes aimed at curbing France's deficit, the largest in the euro area, further fueling political tensions and investor concern. Quickly, let's look at FX update this morning as Japanese yen depreciates by 1.99%. The top currency losers are Japanese yen, losing a negative 1.99%, and the euro, a negative 0.64%, Polish zloty, a negative 0.55%, the British pound, a negative 0.34%. Gains are led by the dollar index, 0.69%. And the market shows Euro USD market at 1.165 US dollar, equaling €1. The euro falling a negative 0.7%. The pound also dropping a negative 0.4%. The Australian dollar against the US dollar, Australian dollar falling negative 0.19%. And the New Zealand dollar also falling a negative 0.33%. The US dollar has been quite dominant this morning market, gaining against the Japanese yen 1.99% and gaining against the Chinese yuan 0.15%. And the Swiss franc gaining against the Swiss franc 0.43%. Similarly, with other commodities or other currencies, the US dollar has gained against the Mexican peso, the Indian rupee, the Brazilian real, the Russian ruble, and the South Korean won, the US dollar being dominant. Meanwhile, Vietnam tourist arrival climbs 19.5% year-on-year in September. International arrivals to Vietnam increased by 19.5% year-on-year or year-over-year to 1.52 million in September 2025, following a 16.5% growth in the previous month. Visitors from Asia rose 17.4%, led by strong gains from China 40.2%, Japan 14.7%, Malaysia 41.6%, Cambodia 47%, and the Philippines 84.1%. Arrivals from America grew 2.6%, driven mainly by Canada 7%. Meanwhile, European tourists surged 57%, with notable increases from Russia at 240.5%, the UK, France, and Germany also increasing. And visitors from Australia gained 6.5%, while those from Africa went up 4.3%. For the first time, the first 9 months of the year, total international arrivals climbed 21.5% to 15.44 million. Still in Vietnam, the third quarter GDP growth is the strongest in 3 years. Vietnam's GDP expanded 8.23% year-on-year in the third quarter of 2025, quickening from an upwardly revised 8.19% rise in the previous period, marking the fastest pace since third quarter of 2022. Growth was broad-based, with all sectors advancing further, including industry and construction, services and agriculture. Meanwhile, trade remained resilient despite a 20% U.S. tariff imposed in early August, with the third quarter goods exports and imports each surging 18.4% and 20.2%. On the expenditure side, final consumption gained 7.79% year-on-year, while fixed investment rose 8.97%. Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh recently projected exports to climb over 12% this year, citing optimism around ongoing U.S. trade negotiations. However, a UN report warned that tariff could slash up to 20% of Vietnam's U.S.-bound exports, potentially marking its hardest hit Southeast Asian economy. For the first 9 months of the year, the country's GDP grew by 7.85%, the strongest performance since 2011. Well, finally, on world economy, gold hits record above $3,900 as U.S. shutdown continues. Gold prices surged past $3,900 per ounce to a record high today, driven by investors seeking a safe haven asset amid growing worries over a prolonged U.S. government shutdown. The shutdown was extended into this week after the Senate on Friday failed to advance competing plans to extend federal funding. This has delayed key economic releases, including September's non-farm payroll report, leaving investors to rely on alternative indicators that signal a weakening labor market and reinforce expectations of imminent rate cuts. Now quickly, let's go to the market now, looking at the commodity market this morning. The commodity market. Commodity market begins with crude oil, U.S. crude at $62 per barrel, gaining 1.18 points or 1.94%. Brent, Nigeria's price benchmark at $65 per barrel, gaining 1.73%. Natural gas gaining, gasoline, heating oil, gold price gaining 1.35%, silver gaining 1.04%, and copper dropping. Further commodities in the market this afternoon. Let's look at further commodities. At the price of soybeans at $1,020 per bushel, gaining 0.2%. Wheat price at $516 per bushel, gaining 0.15%. Coal price drop, gaining 0.14%, and steel price falling by negative 0.89%. Well, it's the outlook on world economy, and here we draw the curtain in today's edition of World Economy. Thank you for being a part of it. My name is Blyden Rakim, and thank you for watching.